Hey there, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning. We are going to go ahead and get started in about a minute. Just going to give one more minute for people to join. Thanks. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Our webinar this morning is Exterminate Production Bugs with Ease. We're going to be taking a look at how you can use Prodly to help with some production hot fixes. Our webinar should run for about 20 minutes this morning. Try to keep it short, sweet, and to the point. Just some housekeeping notes. Attendees are muted, but you can ask your questions in the question box, and we'll get to those at the end or have someone follow up with you if we're not sure the answers. And we are recording this webinar, so you will get a copy tomorrow, the 21st. Quick introductions. My name is Joe Marshall. I'm the Customer and Partner Marketing Manager here at Prodly. And with us today, I have Abby Malvastudo, our Customer Success Manager. Abby's going to sort of be going through some of the content we have here on exactly how Prodly can help with production hotfixes. So without further ado, let's jump into our first question. We're going to sort of have some questions and answers to go through this content. And first, my first question for you, Abby, is going to be, when we say production hotfix, what do you exactly mean by hotfix?
Okay, well, from my experience on this side, we know that hotfix can generally mean a few things, but more specifically, what we are looking at are things like one-off changes to resolve a bug that somebody noticed in production. Sometimes it can be bugs that are not able to be resolved in the normal release cycle, mostly because they need to be made sooner. It's a quick fix. So also issues requiring a hotfix are typically not readily reproducible in a sandbox. So again, it's generally one of those things that super quick fix that you might be tempted to make the change in production really quick, but we'll get to that in a minute.
And what would you say the best practice is for making these hotfixes?
Well, sometimes we run into situations where admins and dev teams don't necessarily have strong processes in place to like predictably and repeatedly manage some of these issues. So what we try to do is say, hey, don't make the change in production. This is more just along the lines of change management best practice overall, not necessarily Prodly, not even necessarily Salesforce. But also, since many teams don't really have a strong, as like I said, process in place to take care of those things, they may feel forced to make those changes in production. Again, big no-no. Generally, the risk far outweighs the benefits when you're thinking about making changes in production. So when it comes to talking about best practice overall, generally you want to go through and have a plan in place. So there's a prep stage that's usually involved. This could be, cross departments where a team would get together and say, hey, this is something that our sales team noticed. This is how it's affecting the sales team. What can the business users and other dev teams and so on, how can we approach this? From there, Then you're going to start talking about how are we going to isolate this and seed a sandbox with the affected records that we can go ahead and execute a fix. And then after the fix is implemented and everything is pushed back into production, or even before then while it's still in the sandbox, hey, did it work? What didn't? Is this safe to move into production? So yeah, just really reiterating that even though it may only take a couple of seconds to make the change in production, obviously you can see based on the best practice that there is a significant amount of planning involved to make sure that it's not going to affect daily operations.
How does Prodly help with this?
So ways that Prodly specifically can help with this are going to be things like during the planning phase, when you're still trying to figure out what general data you would like to move over to the sandbox so that we can test everything and what's going to be useful. You can use Prodly to create your data sets, and you can have them for general use. They're not like something that you use once and you never have access to it again. So if you create a data set in order to address this issue in something that you wanted to just save for future use, you could. You also have, downloadable templates that you can go through and modify and save again for common hotfix scenarios. When you're talking about thinking about the path back up to production, when you're thinking about how are we going to actually go through and build the hotfix? Do you want to use scratch orgs? Do you want to just rely on spinning up the sandbox on the fly? How can we be effective with those things? We have a DX plugin, and I'll show you as part of the demo how to very quickly just go through and seed something. But then also, do we want to have just a sandbox ready to go specifically for scenarios like this? We can help you prep for that as well. And then, we like to emphasize governance from start to finish during the process, and so we'll help you with that as well. When it comes to the seeding stage of actually going through and using Prodly for this, that's basically going to be a sandbox seeding use case. So that's going to be a matter of going into our templates, trying to figure out if there's any pre-built templates that is going to save your team a lot of time, just to go ahead and pluck it, modify it, and then move the selected records that you want. And then yeah, just go ahead and use Prodly to seed all that. Generally speaking, this process isn't a whole lot different, as I said, from sandbox seeding, but the emphasis here is that sometimes it could take anywhere from days to weeks to seed a sandbox. In a hotfix, we don't really have that kind of time, so it's going to be focused on how to move specific data and how to do it quickly. So during the execute phase of it, you can actually use Prodly to safely move things into back into production to make sure everything looks good. Also, depending on the type of data that is affected, also using things like AppOps test to go in and just make sure that everything looks good before you push anything back into production, that sort of thing. And then being able to use Prodly now to do metadata changes and making sure all the metadata looks good as well, if that's part of the hotfix solution. And then yeah, just moving everything back and testing again. So yeah, when we're talking about the assess phase, same thing, being able to say, hey, before we even push this into production, if that's what we wanted to do during this phase, checking it, what worked, what didn't, or once it's in production, what worked, what didn't. What could we be doing now to make sure that the next hotfix runs either more smoothly, or maybe we can prevent this in the future? If it was a difficult process, why, and how could that be mitigated? And as you answer those questions, it will also kind of help you be a little bit more granular with how you set up your Prodly instance in order to facilitate that.
Hey, so what does this look like? Let's take a look at a demo.
Sure. So the way that I have the demo set up today, let me go ahead and Do change
You should be able
presenter.
to. Yep.
Cool. We're gonna do this. Okay. Can you see that okay, Joe?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So we have a scenario, and sometimes this comes up a lot, where in this case, one of the admins looks like they threw a validation rule into the opportunity object. We had a sales rep that tried to go in here and bring this to a closed won stage. Problem was, when they tried to do that, they got an error. So by going in and taking a look at the validation rules, we saw, okay, well, this part looks okay, but it looks like instead of the discount being greater than 30%, it looks like it was set to just a flat out amount to greater than 30, which obviously when you're trying to win a deal, especially in the amount of something like this, that could be an issue. So from here, we're already thrust into the whole prepping and planning stage now for the hotfix. We've been able to go through and we've isolated this is the issue. Now it comes down to how do we get it out? How do we get it out that way we can quickly take a look at it, test it, fix it, and then throw it back in. So that's going to come down to Prodly. So I've already gone through, I went into success.prodly.co, that's our success portal. I found a really super quick pre-built template for a data set. It's aptly named Sandbox Seeding with CPQ quotes. There were several to choose from, but I thought this one in particular was going to be very useful because I also wanted to see, okay, look, this is affecting the opportunity object. If I were to just go into production and either just delete the validation rule or edit the validation rule here, this doesn't necessarily tell me what else could potentially be affected by making that change. And obviously I have no way to test it from here to make sure that it's not affecting anything. Here in the data set, however, I can visually see, hey, if this is affecting the opportunity object, look at all the other objects that are connected to this that I also have to take into account. So I wanted to make sure that my data set was also going to encompass those objects, just to make sure that nothing else was going to be adversely affected. So here you can actually see the scope of this data set. So best practice here on the Prodly side, I don't want to just jump into this. I now basically created a master copy of this data set in my control org. And if I just go through here and start changing it willy-nilly, if someone else decides to come in here and use it for another hotfix down the road, if they're not really keen on some of the changes that I've made in here, that can get a little confusing. So the first thing that I want to do is actually come in here. I'm going to clone this really quick. That way I have one master copy for the rest of the team. And then I've got one that I'm actively working on in order to address this. So for this, let's just go ahead and name it Opti Validation Hotfix. Cool, so everyone knows that's what this is. This also gives me the opportunity to do a couple of things. If I were to push this data set as it is currently set up, it's going to bring over any and all records that match the criteria of this data set. As you can see, it's pretty large, and I might not need all of this information. For example, I probably don't even need these. So we're going to start by coming in here. We don't really need asset. Again, like this is just supposed to be a super, we're going to come in here, make a quick fix. I don't necessarily need all of these things like event. That's okay. I'm more or less concerned with my numbers. I want to make sure that it's not going to affect anything directly within the opportunities, so that's fine. Task, yeah, we'll get rid of that too. Another question that usually comes up when we're talking about, hey, if this is meant to be a quick fix, how can I determine about how long it's going to take to push this from production to a sandbox and then back up into production. So the size of the data set is going to also determine how long it's going to take to get all of this in there. So by going through and kind of removing some of the other objects that I don't necessarily care about, I know that can potentially cut down on you know, the runtime for the deployment. So that's cool. So now that I've gone through and done that, I want this opportunity specifically. This is the one that we found it on. This is the one that we want to test with. I don't necessarily need all opportunities right now. I'm more or less just going to make sure if it works for this, it should work for the rest. So all of these objects live in my data set. They also have their own queries associated with all of them. So let me go into the opportunity. Again, hotfix, we want quick, we want easy. So I'm going to throw a quick ID equals into here. I'm querying that specific opportunity. Awesome. So I can either go back to the root object if I wanted to. I could stay here in the opportunity. If there were any other fields or relationships I wanted to include, I could. Otherwise, I'm just going to say, I think this is good. I'm going to go ahead and deploy this now. I know when I hit deploy, this is the opportunity that I care about. And because I selected all these other objects in my data set, this opportunity is going to come over, but so are these related records, just to make sure nothing else is going to be affected here. Okay. So I can tell you that I've already done this. I've already pushed it from production into my sandbox. In the interest of time, I'm not going to sit here and make you guys wait to see how long it's going to take, but you can actually see here that this process took all of 9 minutes to move that whole data set. And this is everything that did get pushed. So I know that my accounts got pushed, contacts, contracts, the opportunity that I care about, this particular opportunity that I care about, products, price books, the whole thing. Okay. So now here I am in my sandbox. Here are my opportunities. For that push, I did not throw a query in there, so they all came over. I don't really have many, so it's no big deal. But now what I want to do is I've verified that all the data that I care about did make it into my sandbox. I didn't get a single error in my deployment, so I know that everything is where it should be. Now I can just come in, and if I really wanted to come in and actually go through, and I could delete the validation rule, I can edit the validation rule here in my sandbox, whatever it is that I cared about. And then when I'm ready to, let's say I've gone through, I've made that change, I've tested it, it doesn't affect any of these other opportunities, it's not affecting anything else. This just happens in reverse. So now when you come in, I'm just going to go through and show you what this looks like. I'm going to use the exact same data set to come in here. So this time we're going to go from hotfix sandbox to production. Or if we want to be super safe, we can bring that into staging if I really wanted to. Okay. Or we can move it straight back into production. Again, so hotfix sandbox, right? The idea is this is a change I probably could make in production. I just want to be safe, so I'm making the change instead in a sandbox. A lot of times when it comes to situations like this, people are making the change in production specifically because these other sandboxes are currently being used for other projects. They could be in the middle of their sprint cycle. I'm not going to push something, into someone else's sandbox and potentially mess up whatever projects they have going on. I'm just going to isolate this in a separate sandbox. Hey, I've fixed it. I've tested everything. Looks good. I'm just going to push it straight back into production. And then from there, same thing. We're going to search for that data set. Look, right there, right at the top. And then we're just going to hit deploy. So that's about it. Generally, when it says in progress, it's just in the progress of actually going through and making those connections and whatnot. And as soon as this is completed, This will allow me the opportunity to go in and actually see in real time what's happening during the deployment. Same thing as any other deployment, guys. Super easy. And then after that is complete, it'll look something like that. Oops. Results. Yeah. Ta-da! This is cute. This is still going. But this is the one I did earlier. So there you go. And then the important thing here also, going through being able to actually see your source and destination record URLs, just to make sure that everything looks right, and then you can compare everything side by side to make sure the fix actually worked.
Great, thank you, Abby, for sort of showing what that looks like. We do have one question. With production hotfixes, what are the differences between that and more traditional sandbox seeding you could do with Prodly?
It's just like I mentioned, it's in essence, it is the same process. But the difference with a hotfix being that, you don't need to bring over gratuitous amount of data into the sandbox in order to test it, and have either a bunch of people working on it at the same time. Maybe it's part of an overall grander project. So you're concerned with way more stuff that goes into just general sandbox seeding than it would just for a hotfix. Generally with hotfixes, you care about a record or a handful of records, or like a object and a handful of records within that object, things like that. Hotfixes are specifically meant to be easy and quick and effective, which a lot of times are not really associated with sandbox seeding, right? Because sandbox seeding, again, if you're not using something like Prodly to do it, could take anywhere between days to weeks to spin up a sandbox, put all the data that you care about in there, all the metadata that you care about if you made any metadata changes, into that environment, and then make your changes, continue on the project, so on and so forth. So yeah, this is supposed to be in the need for speed is really what it is.
Great. Well, that is going to conclude the content of our webinar today. Just one last note. If you're interested, you can get a demo for Prodly at prodly.co/get-demo. And is there anything customers or partners can do, Abby, to get some help on this?
Oh yeah, so something else that we have started doing for our customers and partners alike, so this is actually coming up a lot more frequently. We did push our sandbox seeding capabilities, and now people are kind of like, hey, what else can I do? So as a result, the CS team here at Prodly has started doing a change management review success program, specifically geared towards situations like this where you have teams saying, hey, this production hotfix thing looks really great, but I don't know how we could implement that within our current change management process. What would that look like? And we might need some help taking a look at that. So the CS team, again, here at Prodly, has developed a success program specifically towards things like this to kind of show you what that would look like, best practice within Salesforce, but also best practice within Prodly, and we guide you through the whole thing.
Sounds awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Abby, for your expertise. Hope you all found something useful from this webinar. And again, as Abby mentioned, reach out to your CSM if you have any questions. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Have the rest of your
Thanks,
day.
guys. Have a great day.